We're back for another episode of #Finance, and I'm your host, Grace Pedota at the CSC. I recently just came back from ArcView in Chicago. A great conference, lots to see. First time seeing cannabis-infused sunscreen, that's for sure. Really hot down there, and it just turned out to be a very successful event for us. We had presentations on going public from representatives from MNP, Airden Burles, and Haywood Group. So we're really thankful to have had the opportunity to get out there and have some exposure in Chicago. So today I'm just here with Sherry Boodram. Sherry's PhD and the CEO of CannDelta Inc. And CannDelta Inc. is a regulatory and scientific cannabis consulting agency. And just for the sake of this conversation, because I know consulting, it's really important to kind of be seasoned in your profession to offer that kind of advice. So I just want to get started with kind of like your career history and where you've worked before, more specifically Health Canada. Mm-hmm. So if you want to just talk to us. And one of the things that jumped out at me actually was you worked for or with the police, giving kind of your like evidence-based approach to narcotics that they find for certain cases.
Yeah, I did some training for the CBSA, so the Border Patrol. So that was during my time working at Health Canada. But I guess just to backtrack a little bit about my experience and how I even got to that point. Now looking back, it actually doesn't make sense. I think when you're in a career, you just don't, especially when you now start your career, you don't know where it's going and you're wondering, what am I even doing here? But eventually when you look back after a while, it all makes sense. So I did my PhD in chemistry. That was really what launched me into working at Health Canada, because actually when I finished my undergraduate degree, it was in biological chemistry. At the time, I went to U of T. And at the time, Health Canada was only looking for applicants from the University of Toronto in the chemistry program, specifically for the position of drug forensic chemist at the drug analysis lab. So I was lucky enough to get that position right out of my undergrad, worked there for a year. It was great. We basically, my role there was to analyze illicit drugs that were confiscated by police and by the RCMP and do the analysis and testify as the expert witness in court cases if needed. So that was pretty exciting for someone coming out of their undergrad.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Like, what's one of the like coolest stories that you kind of experienced while doing that role at Health Canada?
Well, I mean, it was pretty private in the sense where we never really knew what cases were really involved with the samples that we were getting from the police forces. But we did know when there was certain clandestine labs that were being busted, because it was our team that would go out and acquire samples and then run the analysis. So, I mean, that aspect, we were aware of that case that was going on. So I think that's pretty interesting to know what's going on in the news, and then we're kind of at the back end.
I remember there was actually a story of it was 3 Toronto police officers that had allegedly sexually abused a traffic officer. And I went to I don't know if you remember that case. It was back in 2015, I believe. But I went to the courts downtown just to watch, because it was open for the public to see. And there was a forensic scientist there that was talking about the consumption of alcohol that she had consumed that night. And it was she was up there for quite a long time, and it was pretty detailed into how much alcohol she had and how much is considered, someone to be intoxicated. And it was pretty extensive, which I didn't think, you watch CSI and it's not as,
yeah, they don't go into that detail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great experience. And at the end of that year, I decided to go back and pursue a master's degree, because academics was always something that I wanted to do for myself. So got accepted to York University for a master's degree. I was going to kind of go in quickly and get out. That was kind of the thought behind that. But
never the case.
No, it's never the case. My research project was going well, and we were about to publish a paper. And my PI, my supervisor at the time, was like, "Oh, just stay, and this is great, and we're going to publish." So I stayed and completed my PhD. So at that time, I was writing my thesis, and I said, "You know what? I'm going to go work at the same time." And the same lab that I was working for at Health Canada, they were still looking for some chemists. So I took the opportunity to go and work there while I was writing my thesis. So I worked there for a year and then decided to transition a bit into more of a permanent role because it was a little bit contractual, the one that I was working at as a chemist. So I worked as a project analyst and a project manager for the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. So basically, we're managing the federal environmental assessments of major resource projects like mining projects in Northern Ontario. So that was such a neat job in the sense that the learning curve was so large.
And what did you learn there that you can kind of put forth or that you use now in your consulting?
Yeah, I think one of the really great things, I mean, that was a very regulated program. There was legislated timelines that we had to work within. And I think one of the really great experiences that I had was being able to manage a large group. So we worked with various federal departments. So because we were managing federal environmental assessments, it embodied so much. So it was, water quality, water quantity. We looked at terrestrial landscapes. We looked at air quality. It was Aboriginal people. So we worked with Environment Canada. So we collaborated with them, Environment Canada, Natural Resources Canada. It was so large on the federal and the provincial level. So we got to have meetings with all these different departments so we could come up with a consensus, still meet our mandates, and move the project forward. So that was a really valuable skill that I learned.
Yeah, and so when you are you still keeping up to date with the environmental side? Because I know now you're kind of moved into the cannabis industry a bit.
Yeah,
but
yeah. So I do follow it. I think it's kind of something that's kind of innate to me, I guess, at this point. An aspect of that was the Aboriginal consultations that we did. So we would go to First Nations reserves and have consultations with the people there to ensure that there's no negative impacts to their communities from these mining projects. So that experience in my life was very unique. And then I transitioned back into drugs. So I kind of just was like, I had this opportunity to be a senior compliance and enforcement inspector for the medical cannabis program. There was an opportunity there. And I was successful enough to get that position. And that was great. So I had that experience, that very in-depth regulatory experience working at the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, and then my experience working as a drug forensic chemist. So that rolled in very nicely with the position of a senior compliance and enforcement officer. So in that position, I was able to review applications from like the back end, from the field end.
And this must have been like right at the beginning when the cannabis industry was just...
So it was not in the very beginning, but it was during the time when the regulations for commercial production was still in force. So it was the MMPR regulations, and then I was there while we transitioned to the ACMPR, so access to cannabis for medical purposes regulations. So I was there during those two transitionary periods of the regulations.
That's
so
pretty huge.
Got to see a lot. Yeah.
That's good. You got a lot under your belt.
Yeah, it was great. So I was able to perform inspections for so many licensed producers, Ontario at the ground level, and really get an understanding of the operations, not just the regulations and just reviewing applications and seeing what applications are all about, but seeing it in practice on the ground level and seeing what is actually feasible in practice. And
obviously the environmental side that you had done previously probably helped you in that other role.
Yeah, it did help in that role as well, especially in working with First Nations communities that are looking to set up a cannabis operation on their land, and being able to understand some of the issues and challenges that they face, and even how they're structured from an organizational perspective. That's been really helpful.
So we're just going to take a quick break.
Broadcasting from the heart of Toronto's financial district at the top of First Canadian Place, CSE TV is your trusted source for what's happening in capital markets. Our #Finance podcast series gets you exclusive long-form interview content with visionary entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies in the news. The CSE's On the Street segments get you up close and personal with many of our listed companies. And don't forget that you can find the video version of this and all our media on our CSE TV channel on YouTube. For instant notifications, subscribe to CSE TV now.
And we're back with Hashtag Finance. This is our guest here, Sherry Boodram, a CEO of CannDelta Inc. So one of the things I kind of wanted to discuss with you today, I just recently saw your BNN interview talking about the issue of Cantrust, the recent issue, a Canadian licensed producer that supplies recreational and medical cannabis, was caught growing illegally in 5 rooms. Can you just elaborate a little bit about the story? I'm sure I'm missing a few points there.
Yeah. So what is publicly in the news that you've kind of heard with Cantrust, it's a very unfortunate situation that they were in. A lot of licensed producers do face a lot of pressure, and unfortunately, the licensing process is pretty lengthy. And not saying that it was the right thing that happened there. And of course, Health Canada is reviewing all that information to really make a decision on what the outcome should be in terms of the enforcement action. So yes, it was alleged that they were producing cannabis in rooms that were not yet licensed, but those rooms were supposedly built within the requirements of the regulations. So it's not an issue of quality of the product that there's a health risk necessarily. It's more of
they didn't tell anyone.
It was grown essentially illegally in these rooms. So that's the scenario that's being looked at right now.
And they had some issues prior in the past with Health Canada, am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, they've had some warning letters previously. All this is public information. You could find it on Health Canada's website. They do publish their inspection report findings for all licensed producers. So it's, they're not the only licensed producer that has had warning letters in the past. So it's not necessarily to say that's something that is necessarily an ongoing issue with them. It's just something that, so that has happened.
And I think they had released something that the new management team didn't know. So can you kind of elaborate on that, or how you kind of think if that's true or not? Or
Health Canada will be reviewing that information. I mean, Cantrust has submitted their response to Health Canada and provide some information. They've had a special committee that Cantrust has enlisted to be able to provide some third-party investigation into the scenario. So all of this is being looked at, and I don't think I'm in the position to say that it's what's true or not true, since I haven't personally have seen the information. But in terms of the process and how Health Canada is going to be looking at it, they're of course communicating with Cantrust to be able to get as much information as they can.
And you had mentioned, which I found really interesting in the BNN interview, that there's a shortage of supply in cannabis. Is that just in Canada, or are we seeing that worldwide?
Both to some extent. I mean, in Canada, there is a supply shortage in the recreational side for sure. That's pretty well known that there's, and if you go into any retail store, there's a lot of products that are not available for sale. From the medical perspective, medical patients do have a lot of avenues in terms of availability of licensed producers to be able to get product, and there is some preference for product being available for medical patients for sure. And medical patients they register with a licensed producer to be able to get products, and then they do have the ability to transition or transfer their medical authorization to another licensed producer should they find that there's not enough product or they don't have the product that they are looking for. So there are some avenues for that. And I guess from a global perspective, that has to do with the regulations for other countries as well. I think, for example, the UK, it's not necessarily that there's a supply issue, but it also kind of goes back to the physicians not being willing to prescribe medication. So it's a bit of an education kind of perspective in terms of the medical side and the medical field and how they view cannabis.
And I think you had mentioned too that Canada has, like Health Canada and their regulatory system is almost like a staple system that a lot of other countries can look at to improve their regulatory systems. And why do you think that why do you think it's so good here?
Health Canada has a good system in place in terms of the regulations, how they've taken the time to structure in a way that is in line with the pharmaceutical industry, which is a very well-known old industry, and have pulled from aspects of pharma. And even for the new regulations coming in October, they've turned to food, for example, cosmetics, and they've pulled from all these great pieces of the regulations that have made sense for these industries for a long time to be able to come up with a framework for Canada that still meets their mandate of being safe for Canadians, still preventing drug diversion or limiting drug diversion to obviously the best way possible. And it's always easier to have tighter rules and then loosen them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the approach that Health Canada the government's taking with these regulations until we, of course, get more information from a research perspective, and there's more evidence base to show that, okay, some of these things, maybe in terms of concentration, for example, could be loosened up. So I think we have a really great framework that's been working, and countries that are still developing their regulations, they're looking to Canada to kind of for that. So, why invent the wheel? You know, and Canada did do that for the recreational side of the regulations. When they were developing it, they were looking to states like Colorado.
Oh, interesting. And why was that?
Because Colorado, were already certain states in the U.S. that had a good framework in place. So the same kind of thing. They were not going to invent the wheel necessarily. They're going to take some lessons learned from other regulations and pull from that to create something that's really robust.
That's great. And so let's talk about your business. Are you reinventing the wheel with your company? Are you offering, what makes you different as a consulting service for regulations than any other regulatory consulting company? Yeah,
that's a great question. So CannDelta, we're obviously a regulatory consulting company, but we're also a scientific consulting company. We're all scientists for the most part. I have a PhD in chemistry. The other co-founder also has a PhD in chemistry, and most of us have a PhD in chemistry or a master's in chemistry. So we're pretty skilled in that field, and I think it's very important for the industry and as a consultant to be able to understand the science behind it, because so many conversations we have with our clients where, even they're looking at the regulatory aspect, they're building out their facilities, but they want to know, okay, I want to set up this, I want to do extraction. So what's the size of the room that I should have? How do I set up my lab? If I need any gas lines, what equipment needs that? Where do I need to have this? So it's a larger conversation than just the rules and the paper application. I think clients are wanting more from a consultant, and I think that's something that we have to offer.
That's great. And you're probably seeing a lot more extraction companies, because we're seeing that more and more than flower. So you're probably...
Yeah, people are transitioning from just growing. That's how it was, when the regulation started and commercial production started, everyone was a grower. You couldn't produce oils. And then, in order to have oils, you had to have a special exemption. So eventually the regulations transition where you have more product types, and we're moving to edibles. So things are constantly evolving in this industry, which is really exciting.
I think Health Canada just came out with their new regulatory laws on edibles, extracts. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the regulations are going to be enforced in October. The regulations are pretty much finalized at this point. The final regulations are supposed to be made public on Friday, on the 26th, which is really exciting. But, we've kind of had an idea of what's coming down the line for that anyway, so I don't think it's really going to be surprising to anyone at this point. But we will have edibles, which includes beverages as well. You could have 10 milligrams per package of THC. There'll be concentrates, extracts, and with that, it's 1 gram or 100 milligrams per package. Unless you have a discrete unit, then it's 10 milligrams. and topicals as well. And that's 1 gram per package. So it's exciting. There's going to be a new range of product types. It's going to come out. The regulations will come out in mid-October, October 17th. And at that point, license holders who have processing licenses will be amending their licenses to be able to accommodate these new product types, and will be able to provide a 60-day notice to Health Canada when the regulations come out on October 17th for their new product types that they're going to be producing. So we actually won't really be seeing these new products on the shelves until mid-December or so, after the 60-day notice.
Where do you think we're going to see these products? Like, a lot of people are saying LCBO or...
No, they're going to be, it's the same channel that we've seen for the cannabis products that we have now. So it'll be in retail stores and then available for medical patients online. And of course, every province differs a little bit in how they're structured in terms of the retail sales.
So you're going to be busy in October then?
We're always busy.
Yeah.
We're always busy, but busy is good.
And so what would you say to any of these companies? What kind of advice would you offer them right now with this new these new regulatory laws put in place?
Yeah, if companies are interested in producing these new product types, they will need a processing license. If you're already a processor, it's always important to get your product lines kind of figured out, what kind of products you want to have, your ingredients, have all this information ready. So if you are interested in producing these products, that you will be ready to be able to provide this information to Health Canada and be really sure of what you're trying to offer. And of course, ensure that your facility can accommodate all of these new product types, that you have preventive control plans in place where necessary. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting time, I think.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in today and speaking with me. I know you just had a recent BNN interview. Do you know where any of our viewers can view the interview, or do you have a blog? Are you on social?
Yeah, you can go to the BNN Bloomberg website. You could Google my name, Sherry Boodram, and it'll show up, or CannDelta. You could also follow us on Instagram at CannDelta, CannDelta. Or you can find us on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn as well, all the social media channels.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, it's Grace from the CSC reminding you to make sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates on our listed companies as well as new listing alerts. For more in-depth content, be sure to pick up our free quarterly magazine, Public Entrepreneur, available online at thecsc.com.